Okay, so welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm reacting to another Jeremy Newson documentary, and this one specifically is about Ralph Lauren, so this should be interesting. I haven't actually watched it before, just like the last documentary, and I like doing that because then you get my sort of like raw opinions on things. So let's get straight into it.
The first thing that people look at when you walk into the room is they look at you. And hopefully they look at your face first and your smile. And the next thing is look at your clothes. And whether they look at you apart or separate from your clothes, they're looking at your presentation. So that's your first presentation. After that, you're on your own. What we wear is an expression of who we are. And how we put ourselves together as we walk down the street, and as someone passes by, they turn their heads and they say, wow, I like the way she looks, or I like the way he looks. And that has to do with that mystery. And that's what you really exude. And there's lots of people in the world, and we make our own statement. And part of that statement is what we wear.
For a time, that statement seemed to be the dictate of designers. Fashion media pundits would have it that the designer decade, when the consumer turned to labels for identity, is over. Recessions notwithstanding, is it? Designers may emphasize the consumer's freedom to choose their own looks as an expression of personal identity.
I think it's French.
Yet in reality, this freedom may boil down to a choice of uniforms.
Wow, that's such a good point. That's something I've seen happen a lot in fashion, with fashion designers in general. Like, they promote this idea of fashion's about self-expression. Fashion is just about, like, expressing yourself through your clothes and wearing what you like and finding yourself. But then everything they promote is basically buy my clothes, buy my aesthetic, dress in my aesthetic. So that's quite funny that was pointed out. But yeah, that's just so true.
A bit like a highwayman, new romantic sort of thing, but I just sort of chose it as my uniform.
Uniforms. Freeze any frame from a riot and look at the clothes. Two distinct messages emerge. On one side, the police, dressed uniformly with signs and symbols whose meaning everyone recognizes: power, status, and a unity of purpose. On the other side, the citizens of a free society, freely expressing their opinions and individuality and dressed in an apparent ragbag of styles. But the blue jeans, anoraks, trainers, slogans on t-shirts, etc. are no less full of meaning, a vocabulary of style which the wearers understand and speak. Today, the fashion industry, more than ever, identifies, exploits, and promotes this sense of ganging together by providing more and more carefully manufactured looks, selling identity off the peg.
Wow. I just love the way stuff is phrased in these documentaries, like selling identity off the peg. That is the best way to, so what I just said earlier, that's just the best way to basically just describe it in one sentence. So yeah, I really like that.
One of the great marketers of looks of recent times has been former tie salesman Ralph Lauren, whose success is reflected in his massive turnover.
One of the things that's worked for me is that I live what I do and I do what I love. It's an instinct that God has given me, I think, to be able to feel the world. I don't know how, I just feel it. I feel people. I have a sense of people. I am one of those people. And I design for the people that I see.
You're born into the Russian immigrant family of Frank and Frida Lifshitz. You grow up in the Bronx. Your name is changed to Lauren, and you're full of all-American aspiration.
And you dream, and you want, and you read, and through reading or through movies, you really, the door opens up or the window opens up to a world that you never had, and say, wow, that looks great. Whether it be being John Wayne, or whether it be being a famous baseball player. When I went to see a Western, I was the cowboy. I was the guy on the horse. And when I went to a baseball game, I was hitting home runs. And so my designing came out of things that people really do and people dream about and think about.
Certain extremely wealthy people dream and think about winning the America's Cup. When asked to design the team uniform, Typically, Ralph Lauren turned it into a theme for his next fashion collection. Themed looks have been Ralph...
I think I'll just pause there and just talk about Ralph Lauren for a bit, because the reason why I actually wanted to make this video is because I think a lot of people reduce Ralph Lauren's work to like polo shirts with the horse sort of polo logo. And Ralph is way more than that. To me, Ralph Lauren wasn't necessarily a designer that would invent things like a Cristobal Balenciaga or something like that. He was more of someone that would reinvent the wheel. And something I always say in fashion is context and time frame matters. A lot of what Ralph Lauren did, which I'll get into later, if he did it in a different time frame, it might not have worked. So sometimes a lot of designers have timing and luck on their side. It's just like being at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing at the right time. Because he started selling ties. And I remember reading in the Vogue on Ralph Lauren book that in 1968, I think, I've read it a while ago, but I think in 1968 in America, they used to wear blazers that were really boxy, and the shoulders were really like heavily padded and they were quite structured. And Ralph Lauren didn't like the idea of how boxy and structured and all the big shoulders of the blazers. So what he did was he softened it, removed some of the padding, made the shoulders less boxy, and it was almost like soft tailoring. And that is something that became a big hit in America when Ralph Lauren did it. And he always reinvents the wheel. There's always times like that. For example, there was a time when his wife Ricky, he was inspired to make a menswear suit for women. So even really going back to this book, there are parts in the book where they talk about how it is when you go to like a Ralph Lauren fitting, or when Ralph Lauren was designing things back then. What he would do is he would take a silhouette of a men's suit and then take the body of the men's suit and start tweaking little bits to make it more feminine. So he'll get, it's not like some designers just design a woman's suit. No, he wanted the shape of a men's suit and then just kind of bring maybe the hips in slightly, shorten the sleeves. That's something he did. Make the shoulders less boxy. I remember Ralph Lauren always had big lapels. But I think the only drawback to Ralph Lauren's early designs was because he had his wife in mind when he was designing, and then it kind of just took off and became a big thing. His wife had like a model's body, so she was kind of a little bit flat-chested, quite slim. So it's fairly easy to kind of design menswear for women when someone has that sort of body type. But say someone has wider hips or bigger boobs, it's kind of difficult to design the same way. So I do have to point out that there were limitations with those kind of designs. But I just kind of wanted to get across the idea that Ralph Lauren did quite a lot of things. He did reinvent the wheel. He did change where American fashion was going many different times. So while a lot of what Ralph Lauren did wasn't necessarily overly unique, I think if you're going to talk about American fashion history and how it's changed and how it's progressed over the years, I don't think you can do that without mentioning Ralph Lauren.
Lauren's stock in trade right from the beginning.
To call him a designer, I mean, you could pick all sorts of holes in that. He's a stylist, and as such, he is brilliant. Spotted within humanity a huge nostalgia.
So I love what this journalist said, that he's not really a designer, he's more of a stylist. He'll spot like subcultures, different aesthetics and run with it. Off the top of my head, I can think of like when he was obsessed with like the Western style, and there were a lot of like cowboy hats and sort of that Western aesthetic. Or there was a time he got really obsessed with like British clothing, and he used to make British tailoring. And there's a funny story, and I just remember a lot of what was in this book because I read it like a few months ago. But in this Vogue on Ralph Lauren book, there's a part where they're talking about he went to Britain, he visited Britain, and he was so surprised that they didn't dress a certain way. Like people in Britain didn't dress the way in his mind he thought British people dressed. So he decided to design British wear for British people. And there are Vogue journalists that attribute that to the reason why Ralph Lauren was so successful in Britain, because British people could essentially be more British because, of course, like even British style changed over the years, and Ralph Lauren was more looking at heritage styles of Britain. So yeah, he is very inspired by subcultures, and yeah, I do see that idea of him being a stylist more than a designer. I'm actually going to see if I can find the page. There's a quote in this book. And by the way, this book that I keep talking about is called Vogue on Ralph Lauren. I read it a few months ago. Really, really good introduction to like Ralph's work. If you guys want to buy it, I'll probably leave a link in the description below. But yeah, I'm just going to quickly find the quote. Okay, so to read the quote directly, what he said was, "I didn't know how to make a tie. I didn't know fabric. I didn't know measurements. What did I know? That I was a salesman, that I was honest, and that all I wanted was quality." And I think that type of mentality is something that followed him throughout his career, because that was a quote that he gave when he was still selling ties. And I think that just sums up what I've been trying to say in a little short way. So yeah.
A romanticism, a yearning for perhaps an earlier time which would look safer, for the wonderful rightness and wrongness of the movies.
Ralph Lauren dips into the fictionalized dreams and myths of the American psyche. Dream number one, the Westerner.
They lived a certain life. They were outdoorsmen, they were tough, they were rugged, they were always handsome. They were very masculine. And they had a certain look about the clothes they wore. They wore a certain look, and they were very aware of their style. The cowboy boot, the jean, the work shirt, the western shirt, the jean jacket. They are cowboy elements. I always was inspired by them. They were romantic heroes.
We all have, from childhood, from adolescence, tucked away in our subconscious, special place.
It's so funny, I went on talking about Western fashion and then he explained it. I should have just let him explain it. But yeah, that's hilarious.
Romantic places, and they come from films, from books. And he knows that if he can say, look, walk into that dream, walk into that film, we'll buy it.
When he went looking for the American Wild West and didn't find it, Ralph Lauren made it up.
That's a very important point, because remember what I said about when he was obsessed with like heritage British fashion and he went to Britain and didn't see what he expected, so he made that aesthetic himself and took it to Britain. And that's a theme that he does a lot. And I feel like that sort of creativity is very underrated when it comes to Ralph Lauren, because once again, when people think of Ralph, they just think polo, logo. He did way more than that. The polo with the logo, that's the commercial side. That's after he had built like the aesthetic of Ralph for so many years. Every brand gets to a point where you're so respected in the industry for what you do that you can sell like literally a pillow and it's going to sell out because people are buying into the world that you've built. So those polo shirts are really just people buying into the Ralph Lauren world that he built, the aesthetic that he built. So I think, yeah, that's actually the most minuscule part about anything to do with Ralph Lauren, to be honest, apart from maybe how much money it made him.
From Annie Get Your Gun to the wild and woolly fashionable frontiers person, his all-American Hollywood home-on-the-range look, Dodge City to discotheque in lurid skin-tight satin, brought Ralph Lauren's Westerners to town with a host of mixed messages. And white America loved his filmland frontier spirit, his nifty reconciling of down-market vernacular styles with upmarket designer price tags. And in the Ralph Lauren version of history, the mortal enemies of the Wild West are reconciled on the runway as the Native American makes a stylish appearance.
The blankets they wore to keep warm, that their wives would weave for them, or they would weave, were very inspiring because they were natural. They weren't sold in a store. They were worn out of purpose. And they were made with their own hands out of their own needs and their own inspirations.
American Dream number 2, the Navajo look expropriated from...
So that point that Ralph just made is really important, especially when thinking about his designs. When Ralph was younger, he used to wear a lot of like military surplus clothing, and something he liked about that clothing was how utilitarian it is, and the fact that it's not made for like some fashionable reason. It's literally made specifically for certain functions, and he liked that idea of clothing, and that's why that's sort of a key element to his designs, I feel like, because I feel like his designs are all about being easy to wear, easy to style, not too difficult. When you wear them, it doesn't look like you're trying too hard. It's almost like an American version of like what Chanel did in Paris. So yeah, I find a lot of what he does quite interesting.
A vanquished people expresses the conqueror's yearning for very expensive spiritual authenticity. Never mind that these Navajo fabrics were woven in Scotland on computer-controlled automated looms, the sentiment is reassuringly homespun.
You're living in New York and you're working from 9 to 5 and your dream is to go to Colorado and get on a horse and drive through the mountains. That's an aspiration. The way to get that aspiration is to first, is to wear it. That's your first step towards the goal of living it. And a lot of us don't have the money to do all the things at once, and so we wear the clothes that set the mood and the tone, and hopefully as years will go on, we will acquire that background. Possibly a ranch in Colorado, or possibly a nice home in Connecticut.
American dream number 3, the heritage look.
As a consequence of various political upheavals, particularly the Second World War, you have people who have no sense of their own place in the world, in history, if you like. And we all have a need for that.
Having escaped tough rural reality a mere generation ago, stressed-out urbanized Americans experienced sudden nostalgia. And Ralph Lauren had the instant cure. Treasures from Granny's trousseau, clothing you in a past you never had.
I think another great thing about Ralph, and I just got reminded by what the narrator said, is going back to Ralph's timing. It's so impeccable. Anytime he pivoted the aesthetic of the brand, it was always the perfect time, and that's what people were looking for, whether people knew it or not. And that's why I feel like, I'm not going to say a lot of it was luck, because obviously it's not. It was very calculated. He was ultimately the person that decided to pivot the aesthetic of his brand at whichever time it was. But I do feel like there's a certain element of luck where it was just really the perfect timing over and over and over again. And that's so many different times, whether we're talking about 1974, when he designed a lot of the suits for The Great Gatsby, or a lot of times when he would take inspiration from his Soviet roots, and then that would be a big thing. It's his timing, when you look at all his work and his collections, it seemed to be really, really perfect.
And if your great granny wasn't off the Mayflower, perhaps Daddy was a great white hunter, straight out of Africa. Though with all the wild animal smells hopefully obliterated by your Ralph Lauren perfume, Safari.
My ads over the years have been very much how people live, and primarily in the beginning, very much about America and how Americans live and how they might want to live if they had the time and the money to live, and sort of presented my dreams to them. Sort of said, look, I know you might not be thinking about it, you didn't ask me to do this, but what do you think of this? I like this, what do you think? And I think they responded.
They responded to the tune of $3.5 billion a year, enabling Ralph Lauren to have that ranch in Colorado, that house in Connecticut, and turn a 7th Avenue suite of offices into a mahogany-paneled repro Scottish baronial hall. And this, perhaps Ralph Lauren's greatest marketing achievement, Rhinelander Mansions. Is this an aristocrat's ancestral home? Or is it Ralph Lauren's latest store on Madison Avenue in the heart of Manhattan?
One thing about Ralph, and I quoted something about him being a good salesman. I think he's an amazing salesman. Just in terms of selling aspiration and selling an aesthetic through his brand. Yeah, there aren't many people that have done that better than Ralph, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion, of course.
Rhinelander building, which is the most extraordinary piece of marketing in the last 20 years, is an amazing concept. The idea was that you would take people in to what appeared to be the privileged atmosphere of something like a club or a stately home or whatever. It's all beautifully polished wood and lots of things scattered around, apparently at random, not for sale, like old books and beautiful old pictures and family groups and everything. So you feel you're in a privileged world immediately, the world of the 30s upper classes.
You don't want to shop, you want to move in, because it is just room sets that come from the fantasies of every one of us, that's ever thought, what I want to be when I grow up is a very rich lady with lots of big houses with big rooms and rich furnishings and a history.
Old worlds for new money. Ralph Lauren cleverly markets looks which appear to have been there forever.
When I was young in the 50s, you still had to sort of ape your betters. I used to wear cavalry twill trousers and sports coats, heavy, tweedy sports coats. You see, I've never been able to cast. You see, early training stays with you. Here am I wearing, which happens to be a Ralph Lauren. I'm wearing a heavy Ralph Lauren thing, which is the sort of thing my father wore and my grandfather wore.
Said to be the designer who never had an original idea, Ralph Lauren's looks run counter to the usual dynamic of fashion, suggesting stability, breeding, and tradition.
Your family's perhaps...
Wow. Perfect. Exactly what he said. Because Ralph never had really original ideas, but the specific times when Ralph was doing things, it was different to what the rest of the industry was doing. It was counter, like the narrator said. So yeah, that is a good illustration, because I know I said something similar, but this narrator is definitely way better than me at making things sound concise and, saying the same thing in like less words, essentially.
Didn't have beautifully manicured lawns and a yacht and all the appurtenances of wealth, but you can pretend they had, because you can dress in the way that they dressed. This was heady wine for the Americans, supposedly the most egalitarian country in the world, but of course riddled with snobbery.
American dream number 4, the British aristocratic look. That old school you never went to, that exclusive club you never quite belonged to, the regimental mess, the Grousemore Lodge in the Highlands. Rhinelander Mansion presents the perfect backdrop to your most exclusive aspirations.
But you've got the added advantage that you can actually take some of it away because you can buy something,
Not only is he an American, but he's a Jewish American from the Bronx, an outsider, and possibly his craving to belong to those magic worlds is very strong.
As is his craving for authenticity. Indeed, Ralph Lauren's British aristocratic look is so convincing that in the ultimate irony, the British aristocracy themselves have become regular patrons of his ersatz tradition. When one member of the royal family wore the look,
so that's something I said earlier.
Lauren.
Remember, I said that earlier.
Dresses beautifully, and in snapshots around the house, so, when she's casual, I've seen many of my things being worn. I think she's a very good example of things I make.
Like all good palaces, Ralph Lauren's pretend one in the heart of Manhattan contains a palace guard, or at least strong references to a military presence. In his latest and perhaps most successful line, American Dream number 5, an officer and a gentleman.
A man who had to go to war because he was defending his country. He's gallant, and he's staunch, and he wears these things for battle, and he wears them for dress, and they are his uniform. And so he's given that uniform. He's not going out designing the uniform and wearing it. He's wearing it. And quite by chance, the utility fabrics, the army shirt, the battle jacket, the fatigues, the combat boots, the military coats, romantic.
For the post-Cold War 90s, a stylish, nationally non-specific, and totally bloodless fashion coup.
The ceremonial clothes, the dress military, as I had called it, the way that started is I wanted to develop a new blazer. And I was looking for an inspiration because the blazer with brass buttons really did come from probably the naval military or the naval world. What I thought was interesting in doing the dress military is it was for women. Women never wore it. It was exciting for women because it was a new way of making a statement that was both ornate and sporty at the same time.
Ralph Lauren's marketing genius resides in paradoxes. His feeling for looks, which are essentially fantasies alien to his own background, are genuine and heartfelt. Thus his homages have the ring of authenticity, never straying into parody. And he turns imported national styles into a cosmopolitan dressing-up box exported on a global scale.
Now that my products and my stores are around the world, it's evidently an international vision because everyone gets the message, whether you're speaking Japanese or French or Italian. There is a sense of aspirations that the whole world has, and we're all the same.
I actually really enjoyed watching that, and I got to jog my memory in a bit of Ralph Lauren history. I think Ralph Lauren doesn't get a lot of credit, or he doesn't get the credit he deserves in terms of fashion and things he's done in fashion. So I think I might have to make a video at some point talking about Ralph Lauren's work more specifically and more in depth, because I think there are a lot of things that he did that aren't really spoken about, and it gets overshadowed by like polos with logos on them. But yeah, on that note, comment down below what your thoughts are on the reaction or just on Ralph Lauren's work in general. On that note, if you want to support the channel, of course, you can do so via supporting me via Patreon, and the link to that is in the description below. Also, my magazine is releasing soon. It's releasing on the 29th of May, and that should be really exciting. Hopefully everyone likes it. It's going to cost £40 because the print run is so small. And because I realize that can be expensive for a lot of people, I've also offered a digital version, which will be £5. So when you buy it, you just get the PDF to your email, because I want everyone to be able to read it, essentially. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it. I probably won't make another video till my magazine releases, which is why I'm talking about it now, because I have university work and I'm going to start working for BOF as a writer. So I've got a lot of things I'm doing right now. But anyway, that's totally unrelated to this reaction video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you all get my magazine, and I'll be back with another video very soon.